That afternoon, I was in the garden, doing what I always did on a Tuesday, tending to Eleanor's roses. The steady snip of the pruning shears echoed in the quiet, a sound as familiar as the heartbeat of the house itself. The air was thick with the sweet scent of damp earth and petals. After the midday shower, I cut away a withered bloom, feeling the simple satisfaction of a job well done. Eleanor loved this garden, and so, I loved it too. The phone in my pocket vibrated, shattering the peace. It was Claire, my daughter. "Dad, I'm calling to let you know we can't make it for dinner tonight." Her voice was a little rushed. I stopped my work, leaning against the trellis. "Is something wrong?" "No. Nothing's wrong. Julian has a last-minute meeting. His boss just called. I'm so sorry. Dad, we'll come by this weekend." "It's all right. Sweetheart, work is important." I said it, and I meant it. But when the call ended, overheard, nameless taste of disappointment crept over me. It was only dinner. We had it together every week. But their absence today left a larger silence than usual. I stood there for a long while, watching the sun begin its slow descent behind the trees. It was then that I remembered the antique shop in town. Last week, Eleanor had mentioned a silver hair brooch she'd seen there. A thought sparked I would drive into town, buy it, and surprise her. The small joy of imagining Eleanor's smile was enough to chase away the recent emptiness. I put away my gardening tools, wiped my hands on my trousers, and headed for the garage. The road into town wound beneath a canopy of old trees, the late-day sun filtering through the leaves, creating a dance of light on the hood of my car. But the weather turned quickly. Clouds gathered from nowhere, darkening a corner of the sky, and the rain began to fall. At first, it was just a light patter. Then it grew heavier, drumming a frantic rhythm on the windshield. The world outside the car window blurred, leaving only smeared streaks of light. I stopped at the central intersection, waiting for the light to change. The wipers worked at full capacity, swiping away a curtain of water only for it to be instantly replaced. As I waited, my gaze drifted to the Gilded Spoon café on the corner. It was a posh, stylish place, the kind Eleanor loved, but I did not. And then, I saw Julian. My son-in-law was sitting alone at a table by the window, his back to the street. A strange feeling arose. Julian had a last-minute meeting with his boss. He'd said, perhaps it had ended early. I made a mental note to honk the horn and tease him when the light turned green. But then, the cafe door swung open. A woman hurried in, holding an umbrella at an angle, and my heart seemed to stop for a beat. It was Eleanor. She didn't see me. She walked briskly to Julian's table. He stood, and the way he did it was not the perfunctory greeting of a son-in-law to his mother-in-law. He drew her close, a gesture that was natural and possessive. And then he leaned down to place a soft kiss on her hair, still damp with a few drops of rain. They sat down, facing each other. From her expensive handbag, Eleanor withdrew a thick file of documents and pushed it across the table toward him. My world froze in that moment. The sound of the rain, the hum of the engine next to me, the tireless swish of the wipers. It all receded. All that remained was the image of the two of them in the brightly lit window frame, their heads bent together over the documents, whispering something I could not hear. They looked like conspirators. The light had turned green. A horn blared from behind, insistent, pulling me back to reality. My hands gripped the steering wheel. cold and tight. The horn from the car behind me was like a fist to the back of my neck, yanking me back to reality. My hands gripped the steering wheel, cold and tight. I pressed the accelerator mechanically, letting the car roll through the intersection. I didn't go far. I just pulled over to the curb on the next block, where I could still clearly see the door of the Gilded Spoon in my rearview mirror, through a curtain of rain that was growing heavier. Everything inside me was screaming, but on the outside, I was just a man, patiently waiting for something. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Eleanor and Julian stepped out, standing under the awning to avoid the rain. They didn't hold hands, didn't embrace. There was just a discreet nod, a look of shared, unspoken, meaning a final whispered instruction that the wind and rain swallowed whole. Then they parted ways. Eleanor went to the left, opening her umbrella. I watched her get into our car, the one I had just taken for service last week, and drive away, toward the house she and I had built together. A wave of nausea churned in my stomach. Julian walked in the opposite direction, without an umbrella, letting the rain soak his carefully styled hair. He got into his sleek sports car, the one he was always so proud to show off as the fruit of his lucrative deals. The choice was clear. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my mind was terrifyingly cold. I started the engine again. Julian's car had turned the corner, and I followed, keeping just enough distance to remain unseen. His red taillights were the only thing I focused on, two ghostly spots piercing the thick veil of rain. We drove out of the town center, toward the quiet streets where my daughter's house was located. Julian and Claire's home came into view, a modern, cold structure with sharp lines and large glass windows. Looking out of place in the gray downpour, I parked on the other side of the street, under the canopy of an old oak tree, where the darkness and the storm were a perfect camouflage. Light spilled from the ground floor study window. The window was cracked open, just a sliver, enough for the damp air to seep in. I saw the shadows of two people moving inside. And then I heard Julian's voice, a bit strained, cutting through the sound of the rain. "Are you still sure this is a good idea? The old man isn't a fool." A short pause. Then Eleanor's voice, sickeningly sweet, the same tone she always used when she wanted to reassure me. "It's precisely because he isn't a fool that we must do it this way. Julian, Arthur only believes what he wants to believe. Why do you think I've had to painstakingly play the part of a contented wife all these years?" Julian's sharp laugh rang out. "So these papers, as soon as he signs them, we'll have full control." "Not just control. My dear boy." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper, but it was laden with power. "It's liberation. For me, for Claire, and for you. She deserves a life where she doesn't have to wait for her father's charity." A bone-deep chill ran down my spine, colder than the October rain. I killed the engine, and the darkness and the sound of the storm immediately enveloped me. With a trembling hand, I took out my phone and switched on the voice recorder. Then, without a sound, I opened the car door and stepped out into the deluge. The rain was torrential, pouring down, cold and relentless. But I felt nothing. Adrenaline is a strange sort of coat. I crossed the street, moving in the shadows, pressing myself against the wet hedges that surrounded the house. Every step was deliberate. Every rustle of a leaf underfoot made my heart leap. I was like a thief on my own family's land. I pressed myself against the cold wall of the house, right below the open study window. From here, I could hear every word, as if they were whispering directly into my ear. "But Claire," Julian's voice held a trace of hesitation, "if she finds out we did this behind her father's back, she'll never forgive me. She loves him." Eleanor's soft, contemptuous laugh was as sharp as a shard of glass. "Claire is naive. My dear, she loves you, and she will believe anything you tell her. As for me, I will explain to her that this was the only way to protect her future, that her father is no longer lucid enough to run things, a bit of a decline due to old age, a few bad business decisions. People will believe it. Julian, people always want to believe the simple story." I had to bite my lip to keep from cursing aloud. She was talking about me as if I were a piece of old furniture to be disposed of. "And these documents?" Julian asked, his voice more confident now. "Are you sure his lawyer won't spot it?" "His lawyer has also been my lawyer for years," Eleanor replied, her tone condescending. "Everything has been arranged perfectly. The transfer clauses are hidden deep within routine authorization documents. You just need to slip them into the quarterly report you always present to him. Arthur will sign without reading. He always trusts me." The way she emphasized the word always was filled with such contempt, as if my trust were a fatal flaw she had been exploiting for years. A long silence followed. I could almost hear the gears turning in Julian's head. Then he asked a question that made the blood in my veins run cold. "After it's done, what do we do with him?" Eleanor's voice became frigid, completely devoid of emotion. "He'll have a comfortable retirement. I've already found a very nice place. Quiet. In the countryside, with a 24/7 medical staff. He will no longer be a burden to any of us. Everyone will think he went there voluntarily. For a rest cure. An asylum. They were going to put me in an asylum." That was enough. The phone in my hand had recorded everything. I backed away, step by step, as silent as a ghost. The rage inside me had now been replaced by a clear, razor-sharp purpose. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my trust for foolishness. And they were going to pay for that mistake. I got back to my car, soaked and trembling, but not from the cold. I started the engine, and it roared to life with an angry growl in the rainy night. As I drove away, I didn't look back at that house. There was only one thought in my mind now: the game was on. And now, it was my turn to make a move. I don't remember how I drove home. The familiar road seemed alien, and the house I once considered a home now appeared as an empty shell. A stage for a play, where I was the only audience member who knew the truth. I pulled the car into the garage, but instead of going through the front door, where Eleanor might have already returned and be waiting with a false smile, I went around to the back garden. The rain had subsided, leaving only a light drizzle falling on my shoulders. A warm light spilled from my workshop, a small outbuilding I had built with my own hands years ago. It was my sanctuary, a world of its own, separate from the rain and the deceit. The familiar scent of pine and linseed oil welcomed me like an old friend. Leo was there, my son. He stood at the workbench, his back to the door, his tall, too lean frame focused on a block of walnut. The quiet, rhythmic tap of a chisel against the wood was the only sound. Leo was not like me, nor like Claire. He was quiet and introverted, a true artist, one who found his language not in words, but in the curve of wood, the smoothness of stone. He heard me enter. The chiseling stopped. Leo set his tool down gently, then turned, He didn't say, "You're back, Dad," or any other hollow greeting. He just looked at me. His eyes, deep and perceptive, scanned my face. And I knew he saw it all. He saw the collapse hidden behind my attempt at a calm facade. He saw the way my shoulders slumped, the way the steadfastness he had always known in his father had vanished, leaving only a vast emptiness. Not a single question, not a single curious glance. Leo simply walked over to the small electric kettle in the corner of the workshop. I heard the sound of water filling the kettle, the click of the switch. While the water heated, he returned to his block of wood, using a piece of sandpaper to gently smooth a curve he had just carved, as if not wanting the silence to become too heavy. A few minutes later, a hot ceramic mug was placed on the workbench right next to where I stood. The faint, clean scent of green tea rose from it. I looked down at the mug, then up at my son. He gave a slight nod, then returned to his carving. The sound of the chisel began again. Steady. Resolute. I sat down on the old stool, my calloused hands wrapping around the warmth of the mug. I said nothing, and neither did Leo. But in the quiet of the workshop, amidst the scent of wood and the sound of tools, he no longer felt alone. His presence, steady and without judgment, was an anchor in the storm raging inside me. He didn't need to know the story. He just needed to know his father was here, and that he was here too. In that moment, I knew I still had an ally, a silent observer, a true son. The warmth from Leo's mug of tea seemed to still linger in my palms as I walked into the main house. I took a deep breath, putting on the mask of Arthur Cole, the husband, the father, the man about to be betrayed by his own family. I sat down in my familiar leather armchair by the fireplace, picking up a book without reading a single word. I was waiting. Half an hour later, the sound of a key turning in the lock. The door opened. Eleanor walked in, a perfect smile, practiced for decades, on her lips. She shed her damp coat to reveal an elegant silk dress. She looked less like someone who had just been caught in the rain and more like someone who had just left a cocktail party. "Arthur, my love," she cooed, gliding over to place a light. Cold kiss on my cheek. "I'm sorry, I'm late. The fundraiser for the children's hospital ran longer than I expected." "Is that so? Everything go well?" "My dear," I turned a page, my voice so calm it surprised even me. It was adequate. She sat in the chair opposite me, gracefully crossing her legs. "You know how it is. The same old stories. Convincing the wealthy to open their hearts for a noble cause. Tiring, but worthwhile." She prattled on about the wealthy wives, about the donations, about the difficulty of persuading people. It was a masterfully woven tale, without a single flaw, and I sat there, nodding, murmuring an occasional, while the recording in my coat pocket felt like a burning coal against my chest. My trust had once been a fortress, now she was dancing on its ruins and didn't even know it. After playing the part of the dedicated philanthropist long enough, Eleanor skillfully shifted the conversation. "Seeing those children at the hospital today got me thinking." "Dear," she said, her gaze distant and thoughtful, "perhaps we should review our investments. We have to secure Claire and Julian's future. You know, times are changing so quickly." There it was, a soup-lay-up, wrapped in a veneer of concern, a poisoned arrow aimed directly at my competence, at my role as the head of the family. She didn't just want my money, She wanted to strip me of my self-respect as well. The storm inside me nearly broke, but I held it back. I closed the book, placed it on the table, and looked my wife directly in the eye. "You're right," I replied, my voice even. "We'll look into it." The tolerance she had always taken for granted had now become my weapon. It was a perfect mask, hiding the rage and the plan that was beginning to form in my mind. I looked at her, the woman I had lived with for nearly 30 years. And for the first time, I didn't see my wife. I saw only a stranger with calculating eyes. And her performance was about to come to an end. The silence in the workshop could not soothe the unease coiling in Leo's gut. He wasn't a man who understood complex schemes, but he was an artist, a man who felt things, and what he had felt from his father that afternoon was a profound fracture, a pain that went far beyond everyday worries. He knew he had to do something. Leo drove his old pickup truck to the upscale apartment complex where Claire and Julian lived. Their apartment, with its modern furniture, cold color palette, and expensive abstract paintings, was a world away from the warm, slightly cluttered home of his parents. It was clean, sleek, and soulless. Claire opened the door, her expression shifting from surprise to annoyance when she saw her brother. "Leo, what are you doing here at this hour?" "I need to talk to you," Leo said plainly. Stepping inside, Julian wasn't home, which was a small mercy. About what? Claire crossed her arms, a familiar defensive posture. "About Dad. He wasn't right this afternoon. What's going on?" Claire. Leo looked directly into his sister's eyes, his own holding no judgment, only a search for truth. His directness seemed to strike a nerve. She turned away, walking to the kitchen counter to pour a glass of water. "Dad's always like that," she retorted, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "Can't you see it? He's gotten old. He's too controlling, always wanting everything his way. He's not fit for these times anymore." The words sounded alien coming from Claire's mouth, as if she were reading from a pre-written script. They were Eleanor's words, Julian's tone. "Not fit," Leo frowned. "His generosity gave us everything." "Claire, the apartment you're standing in, the car you drive, Julian's job at the company, where did all of that come from if Dad is not fit?" The truth in Leo's words made Claire falter for a moment. But greed quickly filled the void. She slammed the glass down on the counter. The sound of it striking the stone was jarring. "That's his duty." "Leo," she snapped, her weakness turning into something venomous. "It's a father's duty to provide for his children. That's not kindness. It's an obligation. Mom and Julian are right. We can't let our future be tied down by his old-fashioned thinking." Leo was stunned. He looked at the woman before him, the sister who had once built sandcastles with him, who had cried when he fell off his bike. He no longer recognized her. Gratitude had been replaced by entitlement. Love had been twisted into a contractual obligation. The conversation had reached a dead end. He hadn't come here to argue about money or control. He had come to find an ally, to find his sister. But she was no longer there. "I understand," Leo said softly, the sorrow clear in his voice. He turned and walked out the door without another word. He had failed. He had not only failed to find answers, but he had also realized a far more painful truth. He had lost his sister, long before this storm had truly hit. While Leo was grappling with the pain of losing his sister within her own soul, that very sister was being pulled deeper into a web she was oblivious to. The scene shifts from the silence and sorrow in Leo's pickup truck to the loud, artificial atmosphere of one of the city's most luxurious Italian restaurants. The clinking of wine glasses, the merry chatter of people, and the scent of fresh basil and roasted garlic filled the air, creating a perfect curtain for the conversation about to unfold. Claire sat opposite her mother, trying to appear at ease. But the confrontation with Leo still lingered in her mind. Eleanor, in a simple black dress and a string of pearls, looked more like a queen than a mother. She took a sip of wine, her sharp eyes observing her daughter. "You don't seem happy," Eleanor began, her tone full of concern. "Is something wrong?" "My love." "It's nothing, Mom," Claire replied, slightly evasive. "It's just, Leo stopped by earlier. Leo," Eleanor interrupted, an almost pitying smile flashing across her lips. "He's always been so sentimental. He doesn't understand the pressures of the real world. But don't let him trouble you." She leaned forward, placing her hand on her daughter's. "I saw Patricia this afternoon. Her Amelia just got back from a month-long vacation in the Maldives. She looked absolutely radiant." Claire was silent. She knew exactly what her mother was doing. Patricia was Eleanor's friend. And her daughter, Amelia, too, was Claire's age, and married to a tech tycoon. The lavish trips, the designer goods, Amelia's carefree life were always a topic Eleanor brought up coincidentally. "You deserve those things, Claire. Even more," Eleanor continued, her voice as soft as velvet. "But with your father's overly cautious approach, that future will always remain just a dream. Dad just wants to protect the family's assets." "Mom," Claire protested weakly. But even she didn't believe her own words. "Protect or restrain," Eleanor countered, a sharp edge to her voice this time. "This isn't about greed, my love. This is about securing your future. It's about you and Julian having absolute financial freedom, so you can live the life you deserve, not the life your father allows. I'm doing all of this for you." She had turned a conspiracy into a plan for her daughter's future. She had turned betrayal into an act of love. Eleanor painted a glorious vision where Julian could freely pursue bold ventures, where Claire could stand shoulder to shoulder with her wealthiest friends without ever having to look at a price tag. The insecurity, envy, and ambition that Eleanor had carefully cultivated in Claire's heart for years now blossomed. Leo's words about their father's kindness faded, replaced by the brilliant future her mother painted. She looked into her mother's determined eyes, a woman she both feared and admired, and all hesitation finally vanished. "So, what do we have to do?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. Eleanor smiled, a triumphant smile. She squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "Just trust me. You only need to do exactly as I ask." Claire nodded in absolute submission. Amidst the soft music and flickering candlelight, a devil's bargain was sealed. Claire was completely convinced, ready to become a pawn in her mother's chess game. At the same time, as the last of the tiramisu was cleared from Eleanor and Claire's table, in another part of the city, the fires of a different plot were being kindled, but it was not lit with sweet words and deception, but with the steely silence of numbers and truth. My desk had no flickering candles or soft music. It had only the solitary light of a desk lamp, illuminating the stark reality of the figures piled high. In the quiet of my office late at night, I was no longer the grieving husband or the betrayed father. The pain had not vanished. No, it was still there, smoldering like a coal beneath a layer of ash. But it had been compressed, forged into fuel for a cold focus. In this moment, I was a builder, reviewing the foundational blueprints of my entire life. I had spent the evening poring over every document. Every number was a knife thrust. Eleanor's unexplained, frivolous expenditures, Julian's shadowy requests for capital for new projects, and Claire's unending complaints about finances. Though she had never wanted for anything, the picture was painfully clear. I had been too trusting. My love had turned to blindness. My calloused fingers picked up the phone, dialing a number I knew by heart. On the other end was David Chen, an old friend and the only financial lawyer I trusted. "David, it's me, Arthur," I said, my voice low and steady, without a tremor. "Do you have a few minutes? I need your expertise, not your sympathy." There were no pleasantries. I had no time for them. We didn't discuss feelings. Only strategy. "I'm sending you a series of documents," I continued, my eyes fixed on the numbers on my screen. "First request: freeze all joint accounts and supplementary credit cards in Eleanor's name. Effective immediately." David was silent on the other end, but I could hear the clatter of his keyboard. "Second request," I went on. "Begin the process of transferring my entire ownership of the core assets of Miller & Sons Construction into an irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary is to be Leo." A brief pause. "Are you sure?" Arthur David asked, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "Positive," I replied, my tone unwavering. How could I not be? Protecting the company's legacy is the priority. It will not be used to finance delusions. Every one of my requests was calculated, legal, and as precise as an engineering drawing. I am a builder. I do not wield swords. I wield rulers, compasses, and the ironclad rule of law. Tonight, within the walls I had built with my own hands, I was constructing a fortress, not to attack, but to withstand the storm I knew was coming from the very people I had once loved most. I did not sleep, but I was not tired. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, I was on the construction site, breathing in the clean air of fresh concrete and damp earth. This was my world. A world made of tangible, solid things. The blueprint had been drawn. The foundation had been laid. Now, it was just a matter of waiting for the first tremor. And I knew exactly where it would happen. I could picture the scene vividly, as if I were watching a play for which I had written the script. The setting is one of Eleanor's favorite high-end fashion boutiques, a sterile space where the air is thick with the scent of expensive perfume and new leather. She is there with two of her friends, their laughter brittle and false. She is playing the part of a queen, bestowing her attention upon the glittering merchandise. A crocodile leather handbag catches her eye. After a few minutes of admiration and receiving fawning praise from her friends, Eleanor hands it to the sales assistant with a regal wave of her hand. "I'll take this one." She pulls out her primary credit card, a gleaming platinum card, and hands it over. A few seconds of silence. The assistant smiles professionally, but with a hint of confusion. "I'm very sorry, madam, but your card has been declined." A flicker of annoyance crosses Eleanor's face. "That's absurd. There must be a problem with your machine. Try it again." The assistant tries again. The result is the same. Let me use another card, Eleanor says, her voice now tinged with irritation. She pulls another card from her designer wallet, a backup she rarely uses. Her confidence has been halved. This time, the assistant's smile has a touch of pity. Madam, I'm so sorry. This card has also been declined. There it is, the tremor, the whispers from her friends standing beside her, the curious glances from other customers. For someone who lives by appearances like Eleanor, this is not just an inconvenience. This is a public humiliation. Shame, hot and disbelieving, washes over her. Leaving the handbag and her lies behind, she rushes out of the store, her face flushed. Immediately, she calls Julian, her voice stripped of its feigned composure, leaving only raw fury and panic. Julian, what in God's name is happening? All of my cards have been blocked. Your father, he's done something. I can imagine Julian on the other end, initially trying to calm his mother, but as he hastily checks his own accounts, trying to access the funds he had been counting on. The silence on his end is more terrifying than any curse. He, too, is cut off. Every door has been slammed shut. In that moment, they both realize it. This was not a technical glitch. This was a deliberate act. The play had begun. Their smugness had turned to fear. The docile prey they thought they could easily devour had finally started to show its teeth. They were used to me being a builder of houses. They were about to learn that I could also be the one to tear them down. And this time, I was tearing down the cage they had put me in. I knew they were panicking. I could imagine the frantic calls between Eleanor and Julian, their voices shifting from smugness to fear. But their panic brought me no joy. It was just a necessary step, an automatic mechanism in my design. The next step was the hardest. This one would cause me pain. I invited my daughter, Claire, to my office. She walked in, probably expecting an argument, a lecture about siding with her mother. Perhaps she had her excuses prepared, but I gave her no chance to use them. I wasn't angry. The anger had passed, leaving a cold void. I just sat quietly behind my desk, in my own fortress, and gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite me. The space between us was heavy. I didn't say a word. I just gently pushed a single sheet of paper across the polished oak desk toward her. It was a bank statement. Very simple. It showed a large sum of money. A very large sum. Being transferred from the college fund I had started for her when she was a child, to an account in the name of Julian Thorne. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. The same eyes in which I had once seen innocence and love. I asked only one question, my voice low and devoid of all emotion. This money, did you know about it? I didn't ask why. I didn't ask what for. I only asked about the fact. The silence was deafening, but it was louder than any confession. I watched her face crumble. I saw her eyes, panicked, avoid my gaze, staring instead at the numbers on the paper as if they were a death sentence. She couldn't lie, not with evidence so clear, and her silence was the answer. In that moment, I felt no desire for punishment. I felt only a profound sense of breakage. That college fund wasn't just money, it was my dreams for her. A symbol of the future I wanted to build for her, and she had willingly handed it over to a charlatan for a handful of empty promises. This wasn't the moment I realized my daughter had made a mistake. This was the moment I realized that, in a way, I had truly lost a child. I hadn't lost money. I had lost my daughter. and that was a price no construction project could ever rebuild. The pain of losing a child did not break me. It forged in me a new kind of hardness, a cold clarity. I had built my life on solid foundations, honesty, hard work, and tangible results. Now, I would use those same principles to dismantle the world they had built on sand. I knew their next move. When they couldn't attack the finances, they would attack the reputation. The setting this time is the conference room of a prestigious law firm, a space paneled in mahogany and lined with leather-bound books, exuding an air of gravitas and power. Eleanor and Julian sit opposite a seasoned lawyer, a man whose eyes have seen 1,000 stories. They have come to play the victims. "We wish to file for divorce," Julian begins, cloaking himself in a protective demeanor. "And we wish to accuse Mr. Arthur King of prolonged emotional abuse against my mother." The lawyer nods slowly, his fingers steepled on the desk. "Emotional abuse." He repeats, not as a question, but as a legal term to be dissected. "A very serious allegation. I will need specific evidence. Incidents, words, actions that caused this trauma." Eleanor, prepared for her role, begins her tale. But when pressed for specifics, her story begins to unravel. "He was always cold, distant," she says. The lawyer asks, "Can you give me a concrete example of this coldness?" Mrs. King, he was always at the construction site, always working. He was never truly with me." The lawyer raises an eyebrow. "He was running one of the largest construction firms in the city to provide for your lifestyle. Is that neglect? Or is it dedication?" Eleanor is flustered. "He controlled me with money. Did he ever deny you funds, or did he give you carte blanche with unlimited credit cards?" Every piece of evidence Eleanor presents is merely a twisted interpretation of my kindness and trust. My hard work is called neglect. My generosity is called control. The lawyer, all too familiar with the theatrics of divorce, sees through their charade. Their play is failing miserably. But that is not all. At the same time, in another part of the city, an official email has been sent, my complaint, carefully drafted with full documentation of Julian's breach of trust, financial manipulation, and professional misconduct, has reached the Bar Association. The second tremor begins. The senior partners at Julian's firm, men with eyes and ears everywhere, start to get wind of it. They do not care about family drama. They care about risk. And Julian Thorne has suddenly become a massive risk. The calls begin. The emails are sent. Contracts are put on hold. Partners begin to withdraw. The stage curtain that Eleanor and Julian had so carefully erected is not just being pulled back, it is being torn to shreds from all sides. In the lavish conference room, they face the skepticism of the law. Outside, Julian's professional empire is shaking to its foundations. The spotlight has gone out. All that is left are two bad actors on an empty stage, realizing the audience has already gone home. When all the stages have collapsed and all the scripts have been exposed, there is only one path left for the desperate to return to where it all began and try their luck with their final card: pity. Julian's empire was in ruins. Eleanor's lawsuit was a farce. With only a day before the hearing, she went to the one place she thought she could still exert influence: the family home. I wasn't there when she arrived. Leo told me about it later, in detail, but I could picture it perfectly. She did not arrive in a luxury car or a designer outfit. She came as a broken woman, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders slumped, It was a performance calculated down to the last detail. She rang the doorbell, perhaps expecting a maid to answer, so she could storm in and enact her tragedy. But the person who opened the door was not a maid. It was Leo. My son stood there, tall and solid as a silent fortress wall. He showed no anger. He just stood there, blocking the entrance to the home his mother had abandoned. Eleanor began her act. "Leo, my son," she sobbed, her hand clutching her chest as if she couldn't breathe. "Your father, he has backed me into a corner. He is destroying everything. I have nothing left." Leo did not flinch. He just looked at his mother. And in his eyes, for the first time, there was not just sadness. There was pity and a profound disappointment. He had watched it all, silently, for years. And then, from the son who was always so sparing with his words, who always stood in the shadows of arguments, a question emerged. It was not an accusation. It was a simple truth. A question that cut deeper than any blade. "Mother," he said, his voice low and even. "Father gave you the world. Why wasn't it enough?" That question, coming from Leo, struck her dumb. His silence over the years had given his words the weight of a boulder. It stripped away every mask, every excuse, every lie. It laid her bottomless greed bare in the light. There were no more tears, no more acting, only the naked fury of someone who has been unmasked. Eleanor stared at her son, her face contorted in rage. She turned on her heel and left, without a word of goodbye. The final act had ended. There was no applause, only the heavy silence of a closing door. The air in the family courtroom was cold, smelling of old oak, paper, and solemn silence. It was a space designed to strip away emotion and find the truth, a stark contrast to the cheap drama Eleanor's side was about to present. I sat there, motionless, feeling more like a spectator than a defendant, watching the stage being set one last time. Her lawyer, a man with a polished look and a voice trained to be both empathetic and indignant, began his performance. He didn't just speak, he painted. With carefully chosen words, he painted a portrait of me as a sophisticated monster, a domestic tyrant who used his wealth not to provide, but to control, a despot who imprisoned his poor wife in a gilded cage, his coldness and absence the invisible bars. Every sentence was a brushstroke, adding another dark feature to the distorted image they wanted the court to believe. And Eleanor. She had reached the pinnacle of her art. She did not sob. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she sat there, an image of tragic resignation. A timely dip of her head when the lawyer mentioned long, lonely nights. A designer handkerchief dabbed delicately at the corner of her eye, not to wipe away a real tear, but to signal a pain too deep to be shed, a subtle shudder at the word fear. The judge, an experienced middle-aged woman who had seen hundreds of divorces, listened with an impassive face. But I could see a flicker, a consideration in her eyes. Eleanor's performance was working. When the lawyer finished with an emotional appeal for justice for this broken woman, a heavy silence filled the room. All eyes turned to our table, expecting an angry counterattack, a vehement denial. But my lawyer, a calm man I had chosen precisely for his composure, simply rose to his feet. He showed no heat. He did not begin to argue with every lie. He just waited for the silence to settle, for the weight of the accusations to hang in the air. Then he spoke, his voice not loud, but echoing in the room because of its contrast. Your Honor, words can be twisted. Emotions can be staged. But the truth, in its rawest form, has an undeniable weight. He paused for a beat, letting the words sink in. To better understand the true motives behind these allegations, we would like to present an audio recording. A small murmur rose and died. Eleanor's lawyer frowned, a hint of smugness still on his face. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, a flicker of curiosity in her pained expression. My lawyer placed a small digital recorder on the table. He looked at no one. He just pressed a button. A dry click echoed. The sound that came out was at first indistinct. Then it became sharp. It was the voices of two people. Eleanor's syrupy, honey-sweet voice, but now without the feigned tremor. Full of calculation, and Julian's sneering, smug, and cruel laugh. That naive old man will never suspect a thing. Mother, he's too busy with his blocks of concrete. Julian's voice, cold and ruthless. Once we have control of the trust, the rest will be easy. You handle the legal papers. I just need to keep playing the devoted wife for a little while longer. He thinks his money can buy anything. Eleanor's voice chuckled. A sickening sound. This time, his money will buy us our freedom. And everything else he owns? The conversation continued. Every word, a dagger to the play they had just performed. The plan to take over the company, the undisguised contempt for me, the laughter mocking my trust. The silence in the courtroom was different now. It was not the silence of solemnity, but the silence of absolute shock. I glanced over at the opposing table. The lawyer's polished facade had melted, his confidence turning to horror as he realized he had been deceived and made a puppet by his own client. But my gaze rested on Eleanor. Her victim's mask had shattered like a porcelain doll dropped on a stone floor. Her eyes were wide, pure panic replacing the crocodile tears. Her skin was ashen, whiter than the designer handkerchief clutched in her hand. She stared at the small recorder as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. The judge did not look at me. She did not look at my lawyer. Her gaze was sharp as a razor, fixed directly on Eleanor. And in that gaze, there was no sympathy. Only the cold judgment of the law in the face of blatant deception. The gavel did not need to fall. The truth had already delivered its own verdict. The play was over. The stage lights were out. All that remained was the raw, brutal, and undeniable truth. 6 months passed. The echoes from the courtroom had faded. The chaos, settling into a fine dust of memory. The house, once a stage for deceitful plays, now found its soul again in my workshop, where there was only the scent of walnut and linseed oil, and the sound of creation. The storm had passed and left behind a cold clarity. Eleanor was gone, taking with her the modest settlement stipulated in the prenuptial agreement, a small price to pay for my freedom. She vanished from my life like a ghost, without a word of goodbye. Julian, the accomplice and architect of the betrayal, paid the price with what he valued most after money: his career. He was disbarred, his reputation in tatters. And Claire, my daughter, chose her own path. She followed her husband to a distant city, a self-imposed exile, cutting off all contact as a way to escape her shame and her role in the story. Now, in the workshop filled with the warm afternoon sun, it was just me and Leo. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Our understanding was expressed in the shared rhythm of our work. The steady glide of my plane on wood harmonized with the soft rasp of Leo's sandpaper. We were finishing a wooden cradle together. Its gentle curves and fine joints, a testament to a mended relationship and a future that awaited. Just then, the mailman arrived. Among the bills and magazines, a single letter stood out. The familiar handwriting on the envelope was Claire's NIS part. Leo stopped his work, looking at me, a hint of concern in his eyes. I gave him a reassuring nod, took the letter, and opened it. Inside were several pages of handwritten script. The lines crowded and rushed. I scanned them. They were filled with belated regrets, explanations for her weakness, apologies written when nothing could be salvaged. Those words, perhaps a year ago, would have torn my heart apart. But now, I felt only a calm emptiness. My expression did not change. I folded the letter carefully, stood up, and walked to the small fireplace in the corner of the workshop. Without a moment's hesitation, I dropped the letter inside. The low-burning fire suddenly flared up, licking at the paper. The regret-filled words curled, turned black, and were consumed by the flames. In an instant, the past, the betrayal, the pain, all turned to ash and drifted away with the smoke. I turned back and looked at Leo. He looked at me. Then, at the unfinished cradle, a silent understanding passed between us. Not a word needed to be spoken. The past had truly been incinerated. Only the present and the future remained. I picked up my plane. Leo picked up his piece of sandpaper. The sounds of work filled the space once more. Together, they continued their work, in the peace of a home that had finally truly been cleansed. And so, the story of Arthur King concludes, not with a bang, but with the quiet of a fire and the sound of a wood plane. What is worth pondering here is how justice was served. In the courtroom, Arthur's victory didn't come from eloquent rebuttals or an emotional performance. It came from a recording cold, undeniable evidence. The truth didn't need to shout, it simply had to be present. This shows that in a showdown with elaborately staged deceit, sometimes the most effective weapon is unadorned. A rough truth. But perhaps the most powerful act took place 6 months later. In the workshop. The act of burning Claire's letter. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense. It was more of a declaration, a definitive severing of the victim role, a refusal to let the past have a chance to negotiate with the present. Arthur didn't choose to ruminate on another's regret. He chose his own peace. He chose to continue with the work at hand. And this is the question I want to pose for our discussion. Was Arthur's action an expression of strength or of coldness? Is complete severance the only way a person can truly heal from such deep wounds? Where is the line between self-preservation and becoming hardened? Leave your arguments in the comments. I genuinely want to read different perspectives on this, as there is no right or wrong answer. If you find this kind of analysis valuable, hit the like button to let the algorithm know you're interested. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to join me for more in-depth discussions of other stories in the future. Thank you for joining me on this journey. See you next time.